Hey guys, welcome back. It's me, Gimpy, and I'm here with something I have been very excited to get to the table. This is Cataclysm, a Second World War by GMT Games. This is actually what replaced Unconditional Surrender for me on my long-term table. I have one that I've set up that I just keep longer games on that I can come film a turn or two and go back to other projects that I'm working on. And I had to take down Unconditional Surrender to put this one up. And that hurt. I did not want to take down Unconditional Surrender. I wanted to keep that one going. So, I mean, that shows you that you guys have seen, anyone who's seen some of my previous videos about it, know I love Unconditional Surrender. It's one of my top favorite games all time. So for me to take that one down to put this one up shows you that I expect a lot out of this game. This first video is going to be kind of just overview of the setup, some first preliminary thoughts of what I think of what I've seen so far. Haven't dived into every single aspect of it, but just set up how the countries are working, how all the components are lining up, things of that nature. Before we get started, I'm going to do something that I had seen some people complain about and talk for a minute about something a little off subject. I just wanted to mention, I saw an interesting topic on Facebook the other day talking about YouTube wargamers, me and some of the others, and it was people critiquing what we do. Honestly, I'm fine with that. My email's in the description. If you guys ever have thoughts about whatever, send me an email. I don't care. It's not going to bother me. That's not going to hurt my feelings in the least. I mean, I have gotten some messages before of you suck, and then I had some of Mrs. Gimpy needs to do unboxings in a bikini, but those are not what I would call constructive criticism, should we say. But if you have an idea or things you'd rather see or things you wouldn't rather see, or just anything along those lines, shoot me an email. It's not going to hurt my feelings. And I don't know if you guys don't tell me. If there's something you think that could be done better, and I have multiple people mention it to me, then I know, hey, I need to take and work on whatever this thing could be. But I do want to do a good job, and I want people to enjoy the videos that I'm making. I have heard that saying, and I've said it before myself, I do this for me, but I do this for all of you guys too. So let me know what you want so it's easier for me to provide that. And same goes for most of the other guys that I've talked to in this community. I know they want to do a good job and they work hard at it. We talk to each other, so I'm sure they would feel the same way as I do as far as all this is concerned. Anyway, enough of that. Let's get down to it. Excuse me. I set up the game for the mass game, the Cataclysm. All right, the start at 1933, playing on to a indeterminate turn later on, because it can vary depending on what's going on in the game. Certain conditions can take and cause an early termination or have the game go into sudden death, into a later segment. A whole bunch of different factors. But what you are looking at currently is the European theater of operations and all the starting pieces. All right, you've got Russia, obviously over here. They've got the red pieces. These tan pieces here, like this one says Romania. You got Romania, Poland, what is this? Yugoslavia, Turkey down over here, Czechoslovakia, Benelux, I think is how you pronounce that. Benelux. I guess that's Benelux. That's like a combination of Belgium and the Netherlands is like a mass country there, because this game is drawn out to an even farther strategic level. You guys can see none of the counters have factors on them. This is another game. Part of the reason I'm so excited about this is it's another game in the vein of Unconditional Surrender, of trying to have a grand strategic World War II game that's not overly complex but deep enough to be enjoyable. And I gotta admit, during the process of setting up and reading over the rules and going through things, I was afraid this game might have a No Man's Sky type effect. If you guys have played video games, you'll know what I'm talking about, of wide as an ocean, deep as a puddle. The more I've gotten into it, the more I've read through the rules, got the pieces set up, I don't think that's going to be an issue as far as this one's concerned. I have to admit, I like hexes better than area control like this is. Not to say area control is bad, I'm a hex guy, you know, it's what it is. But the more I've read about it, the more I've seen how things can interplay with each other, the more I think that this is going to work out. I'm going to enjoy it probably as much as Unconditional Surrender, if not more. Maybe we'll just have to, you know, see how it pans out. I like games like this that go for the light counter density. You guys can see there's not a whole lot. Like I said, they don't have factors on them. The infantry, it's either well, let's say it this way. Your land units are either going to be infantry or they're going to be tanks. The tanks are just the upgraded infantry, so you would just flip the counter over if you upgrade it. Now that does provide bonuses in combat if you're using tanks or strategic bombers, which are the upgraded units of your tactical air forces, or carrier air fleets, which are the upgraded units of your naval fleets down here. So basically you can think of it, there's 3 different types of combat units. Now there's other stuff, fortification shit, we'll get into that. But there's the 3 basic types, land, sea, and air. And then you have 2 basic types of that. The basic unupgraded version, and then you have the upgraded version. And an upgraded version can take a hit and be reduced down to an unupgraded version. And then, you know, 1 hit, 1 loss, step loss should we say, takes out an unupgraded version. So it's very much reminding me of Unconditional Surrender and that mindset, should we say, low density, simplified rules, but deep rules that you can enjoy, that will give you a deep experience as far as the game's concerned. There is production involved with this game as well. You can see here on the map, a lot of the different countries have these icons. Let me actually grab this counter. I'll put one in the corner there for you. That's a resource there. There's 2 different types of resources. There's industrial, and then there's the natural resources, which is like this Yugoslavia. The ones I'm picking up and showing you, these are limited resources, which means they're used and lost at that point. We'll touch on that more specifically when we get down into the game itself. But the ones printed on the map are permanent resources, and there are, without getting into all the specific rules about it, there are differences between the resources, but for the most part they're just resources that can be used for a multitude of different things, whether it's building new units, upgrading old units, or conducting some type of operation, whatever that operation might be. And what I like about this is in Unconditional Surrender, right? If you took, you guys remember, watch some of the videos on it if you haven't, to understand what I'm talking about. Short version is US had production points. Production points would be used to do everything. This is very similar to that. Your resources are used to do a lot of different things, whether it's converting into offensives, military actions, or political actions. Same type of principle here, but I like how if you take over other areas, you can get those extra resources. You couldn't really do that in Unconditional Surrender. If you took over extra territory, like you conquer France, you're not gaining extra things from taking out France. Well, if Germany here takes out France, well, they're getting some extra resources out of that. Now, there are some limiting factors as far as that's concerned. Where it comes to the democratic powers, they've got the same 3 that you're going to expect in a game like this: fascist, democratic, and communist. The democratic do have some restrictions as far as their resources and conquering and attacking is concerned, because yeah, they're supposed to be, you know, the good guys. So, I mean, they are the good guys. Come on, it's America. We're awesome. But we'll get into that more in depth. Just understand that the resources in this game are the ones you're really concerned about, are printed on the map, so you can easily see what each country has, and you can see what areas you might want to take and push and try to take from them to gain extra resources for yourself and to take away access to theirs. Of course, America has a buttload of resources, and theirs is actually in 2 separate areas. Up here is Washington, so they've got like half of the U.S. represented very slightly up here in this corner, And then it's the same thing over on the PTO map that I'll show you guys here in just a sec. The US is up in the corner of that one, so it's like the top left corner is half the US and the top right corner on this side is half the US, but it's very abstracted and small. But of course all the war was fought over this way. Let's see, what else do we want to take and touch on? I'll tell you one thing that I do like about this is, as far as movement is concerned, with it being an area game, movement is pretty much unlimited. There are, again, certain special restrictions as far as restricted terrain, which all of Russia is, and Russia actually doesn't have that go against them. I'm not going to get into specific rules just yet. We'll get into those when we take and start actually getting into this. I will tell you, there is, as far as this game's concerned, it makes me kind of feel like someone took Unconditional Surrender and mixed it with a coin game. And you're looking at these cubes here. These are the ones that start on the map. And that's part of the reason I feel it, because they have the little wooden cubes, which I like, with it being area control. And just some of the game mechanics. It's not, you know, massive counterinsurgency. But if you took some of the neater aspects of trying to control different areas of a map to take and gain whatever it is you're gaining out of it, resources or influence or whatever it might be, those aspects of a coin type game, and you put it into a area control game set in World War II, I think you'd come up with Cataclysm. And so far, to me, I'm thinking this is going to take and pan out pretty well. Anyway, let me take and pan over to the Pacific map. I'll let you guys just see what that looks like here real quick, and then we'll take a look at all the country cards that I have lined up here at the bottom and the player aid sheet, and that'll kind of finish up the little setup video here, and then we'll get started with the first turn. Alright, you guys can see this is the Pacific section of the map. Of course, for this theater of operations, you see there's a mess load of blue ocean space over here and a bunch of tiny little islands. Now these little squares, blanking on what I want to call these things, these little boxes with a flag symbol in it, these are bases. So some of them start controlled by Japan, some of them start controlled by Britain, some of them start controlled by the US. It just depends. And the neat part is these can switch allegiance. So if Japan starts pouring down here and getting aggressive and starts taking out all these bases like they did in World War II, the US is going to have to come back through and take these areas back over. Other than that, it's very similar to what you saw over on the European side of the map as far as what all the stuff means. There is a lot of special conditions and rules that are going to affect China because they have the whole Civil War thing going on during this period of time. They have these counters here actually are their troops, and they're communist, and then the GMD, I forget what the hell those stand for, troops, which are supported by the Americans versus, you know, communist Russia ones. They, how do I put this? They have their own kind of like independent war that can go on when they're waging their civil war, which, depending how things go, one side can beat out the other side. You can take and support one side, like the powers, which is what the main countries in this game are called, like, you know, Japan, US, Russia, Germany, all those I'll call powers. If you refer to I forgot to mention this earlier, if you refer to something as a country, it means what you would think of as a minor country in another game of this ilk. But powers in this game can take and help influence, try to aid one side or another. That's actually what this little arrow counter here is. That's a Russian aid marker. And then under here, there's actually a German aid marker for, oh, I flipped it. A German aid marker for the GMD guys. So there's, I don't know how to explain it. There's a lot of crap going on here with China. Let's just say it can go multiple different ways. One side can beat the other side, or one power can come in and just take it over and start pushing them back. But the one neat thing that I like about this is there are actual rules in it for Chinese expansion, where these smaller armies, these Chinese armies, will actually start expanding out and taking over the extra Chinese territory. And if you try to attack this area to take it over, say Japan wants to take and come down here and start, you know, laying waste to areas of China, they are going to have to fight those armies as they do it, and those armies can take and keep expanding through the game, depending on how, you know, things go. But Japan's going to want to do that because Japan doesn't have a whole lot of resources that they start with, so they're going to want to capture areas that have resources. So some of these Chinese resources would behoove them to come down here and take them out, but you know, how many resources do they spend coming down here to gain these resources while they're still trying to gear up to go after the Americans, who have just a buttload of troops as far as this game is concerned. I'll tell you what, let me pan down here. We're going to look at some of the cards for the individual countries so I can show you guys what's all going on with that. Okay, now I've got it zoomed in on the 3 democratic cards right now, the country cards, and they're turned sideways because you guys can see I've actually got the maps are up north along here. And if you're playing this game solitaire like I am, which because of the chit draw mechanic, this game should work very well solitaire, even better than Unconditional Surrender because of that chit draw mechanic. But because of it, you have to have access to all of these cards. There's 7 of them, 1 for each of the powers in it. You've got 3 democratic ones. You've got 1 communist, Soviet Union, obviously, and then you've got 3 fascists with Germany, Italy, and Japan. So I've got them all lined up here, and they take up about the whole length of both of the maps themselves. So turning them sideways for me is just to help save space. But really, it's just kind of placeholders for your counters and then your little stats here that tell you how many counters your country can have, what their conversion rate is, all that good stuff. To get into it, when you start and you pick your scenario, it's going to tell you what counters to put into these boxes. It'll tell you your available force pool, which, okay, for the UK here, they start with 1 Air Force and they start with 1 infantry. Now this is not in addition to, or this is not in lieu of what they have up there in the European map. It tells you also what to put on the actual map. So you'll have some where they'll tell you to put on certain areas of the board, and then some get put down here, and these are the only ones you're allowed to build right off the bat. You can't just take and build anything you want. Okay, so I have a plane and a set of troops here. Well, I can't take and build a ship if I want as the UK. I have to take and expand my commitment, which is actually, let's see where camera is. It's lined up along here. You've got civilian, rearmament, mobilization, total war, and then exhaustion, depending on where you are. And you can take and do what's called a political action to try to increase that. So the UK starts with an available force pool of 8. Now that means the total amount of counters it can have either here in its force pool or on the map itself. Okay, that includes all its troops, all its logistics counters, all its upgrade markers, everything like that, and this is the same for all countries, is what your available force pool is. And you get to choose what that is. So there are more counters than you are going to have available for your maximum force amount. Like UK, when they're at total war, which is the maximum amount of counters you can get on the board, and in your force pool, they're at 17. The US has the most with 30, but there are more than 30 US counters. So each game is going to have a little bit of variation because each country or person or whoever's playing it is going to pick different units depending on the situation. They might be, if the US is attacking more into the Pacific theater than the European theater, they might need more shipping and planes at that point. So you'll take and add those to your force pool instead of going for troops and tanks and things of that nature. Like the US starts with 12, and you can see they have 5 on the force pool here, which means they have another 7 up there on the combination of the 2 different maps. I really, really like that aspect of the game. So one of the things you want to do is increase your commitment level in the game, which is, like I said, a political action you can do. So let's say the US increased their commitment from civilian, which is where they start, to rearmament. They go from 12 to 18. So at that point, you would pick 6 counters from your from the counter tray or baggies, whatever you're storing it in, of whatever type that you want. You could pick all ships, or you could pick all planes, or you could pick all troops, or just a combination of whatever you wanted, and then you add it to your available force pool. Up here in the, well, top right, but bottom right of the card itself has your production holding box. So when you get production points, your resource points, and you get, you can convert those into builds. Again, we'll go over that when we get into our player turn. You'll take and use those to take these counters from your available force pool, and some of them are going to cost 1, some cost 2. And if you build it, let's say France builds this ship, the ship actually goes on the turn marker. Let's use this plane instead. If the US builds this plane, it will go in its holding box, the production holding box. And once every country is done doing its production, those counters actually get added to the action cup, the opaque cup where you're going to be drawing your flags and your counters to determine the game. So if the US drew this counter, this plane, during its turn, or it gets drawn out of the cup, the US can take and do a number of different things with this, but say, hey, okay, I want to deploy this counter. That's how you're going to take and deploy it to the board. It sounds a little complicated when I'm just sitting here talking about it, showing you guys the player cards for the different countries, but after kind of poking at it and running through some practice with it, it's a really elegant system that I think is going to work very well. Each one of the countries has their own little feel and vibe to them. And even though they're all using roughly the same thing, they're all using just a plain counter, plain infantry, plain tanks, ships. We're at such a far scale coming back, looking down at things, that there's no real numbers or values to anything. Now, there are modifiers that are going to affect it, but your real flavor and feel for each one of these countries comes from how effective they are, which we'll talk about that a little bit later, and how many units they get to have in their force pool. Again, the US has a massive force pool. Their exhausted force pool, which is not something you want to get into, is exhaustion, is 24. That's more than I think every other country's max during total war. So each country is going to have their own little flavor. Their effectiveness is listed here at the top. That's also going to change with commitment. The bottom 2 numbers, conversion and home front, I think that's the same for all the different countries. We'll touch on that when we get into play, but just understand that your conversion rate is the more, I kind of like it. It's the way they abstracted the fact that the more a country's involved into war, the more they're going to turn their manufacturing and businesses and everything towards the war economy. So as you upgrade your commitment, you're going to get more builds per resource and more, actions through military action on the board, because your conversion rate's higher. So that's a neat thing. But your home front is more likely to lose stability, which can cost you the game, which we'll touch on when we look on the turn track player rate here in just a sec. Gotta say, excellent system. I really do like it. It's elegant in how it works, with each country having a different amount, each country having a different type of effectiveness. They can go up, go down, and that's going to determine the number of dice that each country is going to be rolling in certain types of checks. Some countries are going to be better than others. Like France is very weak when it comes to effectiveness. They're 1 all the way across the board. The US starts okay at 2. They get up there to 3 where they're doing good, but they can go back down to 2 if they get exhausted. So, like I said, each country has its own feel. You guys will see this when we start our first turn. The one thing that hit me is I was looking at it at the amount of turns, which we'll see here in just a sec in the game, and I was thinking this might go quicker than I thought. It might be a quicker game and not as fulfilling as I was thinking, but especially if you're playing this solitaire, you have to control each country yourself. So I have to sit here and think about, okay, well, this is how many production points I have for the U.S. and how many am I going to take and can turn into offensives, which we'll touch on in the turn, but that's basically like your military stuff. And how many am I going to keep as resources to use for builds, and what units am I going to select. And once I get done doing all that for the US and deciding all their stuff that's going to go into the Force Cup, I've got to do it for France, and then I've got to do it for the United Kingdom, and then I have to do it for the Soviet Union. So yes, playing this thing solitaire is going to hold you up a lot, but I'm thinking it's going to work because I'm going to try a different mindset this time. You know, previous ones I've taken and thought to myself, okay, well, this faction is going to be aggressive and this faction is going to be defensive. And it worked for the most part, but I'm going to try to have my mindset that whenever a counter is drawn, say, you know, I draw one for the United States, okay, for that moment, I'm playing the United States. What is the best thing I can do for them? And then if I draw one for France, you know, what's the best thing that I can do for them? And instead of trying some strategy, you know, or have some overall strategy in my head, just try to play it to the moment. You know, what at the moment is going to work best for whoever it is. I'm hoping that'll work a little better as a solitaire mechanic for a chit draw game, but we'll see how it is. All right, enough of my rambling here. Let me just show you guys the turn track player aid card, and that should finish us up on setup. Alright, sorry again, I've got this kind of a little wonky in it. I've got my tripod set up, pointing at it. I wanted to zoom in close enough for you guys to see it. You guys can see this is the end of my country line. I've got Germany over here, and we're at the bottom of the ETO map right in this area. All these line up very well underneath the bottom of the map, so I can just kind of go across having everything that I need to keep track of, and then the two maps up there above it to you know, play the game. Over here on the left side, we've got our effectiveness. Each side has a counter, or each country power has a counter that's going to sometimes vary depending on what commitment level they're in. This is what I was talking about. This is going to determine the number of dice that you're going to roll and a lot of different checks, like your stability checks and crisis events and a whole bunch of other different things. This is also where you're going to take and put your reserve. Your reserve is like any counter that's going to take and go into your little opaque cup that's going to be drawn. You can take one and put it on this track, and that's like your one gimme, because you're not guaranteed to draw all the counters that come in the cup. Actually, no turn is every counter going to come out of the cup. It's going to end before they all come. So there's a chance that you might not see a lot of your counters in there, or you might not see a whole lot of one countries, that they just don't get drawn. So if you have one action, one thing, one unit, whatever it is that you really need to deploy, you can take and put it here, and you can interrupt the cup being drawn and play that during a turn. If more than one person, or yourself, if you're playing by yourself, wants to take and interrupt at a time, then it's done top to the bottom. So you can see this effectiveness chart, it has decreasing and ascending orders, and depending on what is being done, there are some things that are done ascending and some things that are done descending. It tells you which way to go with it. And again, you've got your little markers here that you can keep track of the countries. And occasionally, this is a quality of life thing that I have noticed is on a lot of the different counters. For example, our Japanese one here, you can see it says -1 on the back. And the reason that is there are effects that will cause you to have a temporary reduction in your effectiveness. And you can take and keep track of that by flipping your counter and let you know that, hey, I'm getting a negative modifier, or I'm getting a temporary reduction in my effectiveness. And a lot of counters in this game have that. They have the, I think your commitment counters that are on each one of the countries, and a few others have just those quality of life informational stuff on the back, so you don't have to try to keep track of those modifiers in your head. You can have them right there on your display sheets. Really nice how they got that set up. I really appreciated that. Here we've got our political actions box. Without getting into every single thing about this, because you're going to see a lot of this as we go through the turns, short version is as you try to do whatever these things are: alliance, declare war, increase commitment, maneuvers, pressure, propaganda, special actions. As you try to do these things, if you fail doing them, which is possible to do, because in this game, the way to think about it is a 5 and a 6 is a success. If you roll a 5 or 6, hey, you nailed it. So if you don't roll that, say France is conducting a effectiveness check, they can only roll 1 dice, and they roll a 3 and they're trying to form an alliance, well then they'll take one of their cubes and they'll put that cube in the alliance box, and they'll get a +1 modifier for that cube on the next time they try to do that political action. If they take and fail again, they add another cube, and it keeps going that way as long as they try the same political action. If you change to another political action, or you succeed at the original one you were trying, then those cubes come off. So the more you try to do one specific thing and keep failing at it, the easier that one specific thing becomes. So that's a neat little thing that they've got here, and a way to keep track of it. There is one political action that isn't on here that doesn't get easier no matter how many times you do that. It's called diplomacy, and it's where you're trying to take over another country through just using your political stuff instead of military might. Down here along the bottom, victory point track, real easy to keep track of. The countries all have markers for themselves, and then you have markers as well for democracy, fascism, and communism. Easy to understand. Up here we've got our political display, and I'm going to wait and just touch on this more later, because to really get into it, it's not going to be easy to understand until I've got some countries going to war and I've got the cube stacked up in there. But real short version is this is where you're going to keep track of who's at war with who and who's allied with who. So if France and Germany were at war, you would take 1 cube from each and you put it right here in between democracy and fascism to signify they're at war. It has war for each one. So that's just a way to keep track of that. Here, stability track, steady, wavering, unstable, collapse. As countries take stability checks for a number of different things, you're going to take 1 stability check each turn no matter what. But as you take them, you can lose them. And again, your effectiveness is where part of this is coming into play. If you lose them, you'll start moving down the track. If you get into collapse, your country can potentially surrender or go into exhaustion. You can have bad effects coming from you, coming for your country. So you want to take and keep your country as high as possible. One of the ways to win the game actually is to take and force an entire ideology into collapse and surrender. So for example, if the USSR surrenders, okay, well, a whole ideology has collapsed out of the game and surrendered, game's over at that point. So this is a way to win the game if you try to go that route. Turn track here, real easy to keep track of. You will have a few other markers that go here. Some of your production will be placed on the next turn ahead if you're building ships, or in I think it's upgrade markers or fortifications. I can't remember which, but I know ships go there at least. Obviously, it takes a while to build a ship, so you're not going to take and put it in your production holding box on your card. You'll put it here on the next turn, and then you'll get it on that turn to come out. So you need to think ahead when it comes to building naval forces. Also, this little marker here, this limited war, can flip over to global war, and it gets put down on our turn track here when global war happens, which I'll touch on global war later. And you'll put it so far ahead depending on where you are on the track, and that will signify the end of the game, which can go up to 1950. And after you guys have seen how much I was explaining you have to do for each one of the individual countries, playing this solitaire, it's going to take a while to burn through each one of the turns, because you have 7 different powers to take and try to keep track of, and then all the production and moving troops and all this other stuff, so it can get very heavy. Alright, let's pan back to the map for some final thoughts, and we'll cut it and get ready to start our first turn. Alright, we're pretty well set up to take and start our first turn. Everything is here set up on the board. Our countries are ready. They've got all their markers set to go. What I'm going to do is pick up on the next turn. This is what I'm going to be using as my opaque cup. On the next video, I'm going to take and pick up and show you one country very in depth, how you're going to take and get your production markers, your flags, all the other good stuff that you're going to take and put in the cup. And I'll probably just do it for one country each video or each turn, and then just do the rest of them off camera, so I'm not having it take half an hour, 40 minutes to take and do all the production for all the other countries. Throw it all into the cup, and we'll start drawing from there. A few other things we'll touch on later on it. You got 4 of these crisis markers, which help signify the turns, and then we have our home front, which every country has one in there, and that's going to cause a stability check each turn. And one other thing you're going to see in here is Civil War of Resolution, which is going to happen each turn, and you guys will see it then. So we're going to cut it here, end of our little setup video, and get ready for turn 1. I did want to add one last thing for you guys. There is a gentleman whose video I watched, a little tutorial. I think it was actually released before the game was released, so I think he probably works for a GMT. Forget his name right off the bat. I will look it up and I will put it down in the description though. I'm not even going to worry about doing tutorial anything. His video is excellent. It's about an hour long. Absolutely worth watching. He did an excellent job with it. Make sure you check out his video. I would take and just watch it and then read through the rule book, because he does an excellent job of just giving you a basic overview of the game. Just all the different little concepts with pictures and graphics and all the other good stuff that you need to take and see how to play it. Now, of course, he doesn't hit on every special rule, but he's not going to be able to do that in an hour. But to understand the game, he does an excellent job. Definitely check out his video. Like I said, it will be back down in the description. And that's going to be it for me on this one. You guys stay tuned. I will have turn 1 up soon for you guys. You guys take care. I will see you in the next one.